Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is our 145th segment of our journey of faith in the light of the cross, in which we journey with Paul on his second missionary journey. We go to our screen and we see the theme. Luke used Paul's second journey to show the church was no threat to Roman order, so it had a lot of audiences. Prominent educated Roman citizens helped believers to build a peace-loving church. The second journey is context for Paul's epistles. This is more important to us. How Christ crucified fulfills Old Testament. Okay, we go on now to our next screen. And we read, Paul said to Barnabas, we've done this in our previous segments, let's see how the brothers are where we proclaim the Logos. Logos is the Greek word for word, but Jesus becomes the word. Sharp feelings about John Mark caused them to part. We've discussed this. Then we go to verse 40. Paul took Silas with him. They went to Syria and Galatia, confirming the churches. They passed through Phrygia and Galatia. Now, we see he goes through Galatia, where he'll write one of his great epistles, which we covered in segments 21 to 28. Acts 16:8. They go to the northwest corner of Turkey, Troas. In Troas, during the night, Paul had a vision. A Macedonian is a European. This is a big break for Paul. Pleaded, come over to Macedonia and help us. And this is God's way of getting them over to Europe. Verse 10, we concluded God wanted us to evangelize them, so we sailed to Samothrace and then Neapolis. We and us indicates that Luke is with Paul. From there, we went to Philippi. What's Philippi? Another place where Paul wrote a letter to the Philippians, a leading city and a Roman colony. Now, there are 4 we sections in Acts of the Apostles after chapter 16, after the Jerusalem Council. And they imply Luke was with Paul. Now, the second thing is Judaizers harass Galatia and Philippi after Paul leaves. And this causes a strong pivot in Paul's letter to the Philippians in 3:2. He's been thanking them for being gracious and generous. All of a sudden, he says, watch out for those dogs who want to mutilate. Don't let them change. Oh, it's very strong and very different from the beginning of the letter. We go on to our next screen. 16:13, on Sabbath. Up until now, Paul has done most of his work on Sabbath. We went to the river, the place of prayer. We spoke to some women. One of them, named Lydia, a dealer in purple dye, worshiped God. Now, she's a significant person if she's a dealer in purple dye, okay? The Lord opened her heart to Paul's message. After she and her household were baptized, she said, if you consider me a believer, come and stay at my house. And she prevailed over us. Now, upstanding, educated, wealthy citizens have joined the church, typified by Lydia. Romans should not fear the church. But also we mentioned that these men would probably not go into a woman's house in Israel. This is very different. We go on to our next screen. 16:16. Now, right after this, a slave girl with a fortune-telling spirit in Philippi stalked Paul. He said to the spirit, I order you in Jesus' name to come out of her, and it did. But the owners saw their money also go. So they dragged Paul and Silas to the public square. They had them beaten with rods and jailed. Verse 25, but God intervenes, and Luke is always mentioning this. But an earthquake came that night, and the doors of the jails flew open. The jailer began to kill himself, assuming they escaped, but Paul stopped him. They spoke the word to him, and all his house was baptized. Imagine how wonderful this man Paul is. He gets an opportunity to escape, and he doesn't use it. He's more concerned about the jailer. We go on to our next screen. The next day, the jailer told Paul, the magistrates who had put them in jail have ordered you released. And Paul said, they have publicly beaten us, we Roman citizens. without a trial and thrown us into prison. Now they release us secretly, not on your life. By no means, says Paul, let them come and release us. And Paul demands that they come. And this is another way of Luke telling them, we are Roman citizens and we are good citizens. They came and freed them and asked them to leave the city. They went to Lydia's house, encouraged the brothers, and then left the city. They're not fighting. They go right on. Some church leaders are Roman citizens, not aliens. We go on to our next screen. They went to Thessalonica. There's another city, 2 letters to the Thessalonians. For 3 Sabbaths, Paul taught the Messiah had to suffer and rise from the dead. And this Messiah is Jesus, who I have proclaimed to you. Some worshiping Greeks and prominent women also joined Paul and Silas. Now this word worshiper, which is Lydia, they are people who are attracted to the Jewish way of life, to the Jewish synagogue. They like to worship there, but they are smart enough to know they are not the same blood and they don't belong. But now they see they can join up with Paul and Silas because it's a universal religion where they fit in. These wealthy, prominent Thessalonians continued to support Paul in his later work. This is important. But jealous Jews recruited thugs loitering in the market to gather a mob and disturb the city. So they brought a mob to Jason's house. This is not our Jason. This is another Jason. Okay, we go on to our next screen. They dragged Jason to the city officials and they said, Jason has welcomed these troublemakers into his house. Can you imagine? They defy Caesar by saying Jesus is king. Jason posted a bond. See, Jason is another prominent person with money, and it's easy for him to post a bond. That night, they sent Paul and Silas to Berea, where they also went to the synagogue. They don't fight, they don't resist, they move right on. Jews there were more receptive. Very interesting. They eagerly researched the scriptures daily to see if Paul was correct, and they embraced it. Then many prominent Greek women and influential men joined. So he's really doing well in these 3 cities, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea, of bringing in prominent people with money who later support Paul. We go on to our next screen. 1713, Jews from Thessalonica heard and came to Berea to upset Paul's work. The brothers sent Paul to the coast. The men guided Paul to Athens, where the images provoked Paul's spirit. He reasoned in the synagogue with Jews and worshipers. He was really up. Daily in the marketplace, he disputed with Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. This is the first time we see Paul daily working during the week to convert people. They took him to the Areopagus and said, may we learn this new teaching. He tried too hard to impress. Paul made a fool of himself. We go on to the next screen. He did not mention Jesus' name nor his cross, so there was no power to his proclamation. Some scoffed at the word resurrection. He mentions the resurrection, but not the cross. Others said, we'd like to hear more some other time when we're bored. Paul then went on to Corinth. He later wrote 1 Corinthians 2:2, I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified, because that's the power of the evangelization, the proclamation of the gospel. In Corinth, Paul admitted shame of cross in Athens. Corinth was a big community with many problems, and Paul used the problems to better explain the faith. Paul was in Corinth 18 months, a long time. He sailed to Syria and back to Ephesus, ending his 2nd missionary journey, which we've just covered, and now we go on to our next screen, and we read, Luke used Paul's 2nd journey to show the church was no threat to Roman order. Prominent, educated Roman citizens helped believers to build a peace-loving church, and the 2nd journey is context for Paul's epistles, how Christ crucified fulfills the Old Testament. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of faith in the light of the cross.